From a general who slaps his own soldiers to keep them fighting, to a commander who leads the largest amphibious invasion in history, to the man whose name alone makes enemy commanders rethink their entire battle plan. These are the 5 most feared American generals in World War II. And number 1 on this list fights so aggressively that even his own commanders struggle to control him. Chapter 5. Matthew Ridgway. By the winter of 1944, the German army launches one last desperate gamble. The Ardennes forest explodes into what becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. American lines are collapsing, roads are jammed with retreating vehicles, and experienced commanders are running out of options. But one question remains. How does a general convince exhausted soldiers to stand their ground when defeat suddenly looks possible? Matthew Ridgway already has a reputation for leading from the front. As commander of the 18th Airborne Corps, he rarely stays far behind his troops. Instead, he walks among them wearing grenades strapped across his chest and carrying the same equipment as the men expected to do the fighting. His appearance isn't for show. It sends one clear message. If the commander is willing to stand in danger, everyone else can too. Before we get to what happened next, you need to understand one thing. Ridgway believes leadership cannot come from headquarters alone. He constantly visits frontline positions, speaks directly with officers, and refuses to let fear spread through the ranks. When German forces continue their assault, Ridgway coordinates airborne and infantry units under enormous pressure, helping stabilize critical sectors during the battle. His calm leadership earns enormous respect from Allied commanders and the soldiers fighting under him. By the war's end, Ridgway has become one of America's most trusted battlefield leaders, a reputation that later continues during the Korean War. He proves that courage isn't always loud. But while Ridgway inspires confidence through calm leadership, the next commander becomes feared because he quietly commands more American soldiers than almost anyone else during the war. And what happens next changes Europe forever. If you're enjoying this, subscribe. New stories every week. Chapter 4. Omar Bradley. The success of D-Day does not end when American troops reach the beaches. In many ways, that's when the hardest fighting begins. Across the hedgerows of Normandy, German forces transform every field into a fortress. Progress slows to a crawl, casualties continue climbing, and Allied commanders search for a way to break through. One question hangs over the battlefield. Can one commander find a way to break Germany's defenses before the invasion loses momentum? Omar Bradley isn't the loudest general in Europe. He doesn't seek headlines. Instead, fellow officers know him as the soldier's general because he listens carefully, stays calm under pressure, and rarely lets emotion influence his decisions. That quiet style hides a brilliant operational mind. But here's what nobody talks about. Bradley understands that winning in Normandy requires more than courage. It requires solving a tactical problem no army has faced before. The dense hedgerows allow German defenders to ambush advancing American troops from almost every direction. Bradley works closely with frontline commanders to develop new methods for breaking through these defenses, eventually leading to Operation Cobra in July 1944. The breakthrough changes everything. American armored divisions pour through weakened German lines, forcing a retreat that eventually leads to the liberation of Paris just weeks later. By the end of the war, Bradley commands the 12th Army Group, the largest field command ever led by an American general, with more than 1 million soldiers under his authority. His quiet leadership helps reshape the entire Western Front. But commanding huge armies isn't enough for the next man. His battlefield decisions become so influential that presidents and prime ministers rely on him to plan the war itself. Chapter 3. George C. Marshall. While American soldiers are fighting across Europe and the Pacific, one man is fighting a very different battle. He isn't leading charges across open fields. He isn't commanding tanks through enemy lines. Yet one question follows him throughout the war. How does a general become one of Germany's greatest threats without firing a single shot in combat? George C. Marshall serves as the United States Army Chief of Staff, making him the senior officer responsible for building, training, and expanding America's ground forces after the United States enters World War II. The task is almost impossible. In 1939, the United States Army ranks only 17th in the world in size. Within just a few years, Marshall oversees its transformation into one of the largest and most powerful fighting forces in history. Before we get to what happened next, you need to understand one thing. Marshall isn't interested in politics or personal recognition. He chooses commanders based on ability, not seniority. When he believes someone is the right man for the job, he promotes them quickly, even if it means passing over more experienced officers. That decision changes the course of the war. Marshall selects leaders like Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George Patton for positions that eventually shape the Allied victory in Europe. He also coordinates closely with President Franklin Roosevelt and Allied leaders, helping organize military strategy across multiple continents at the same time. By the end of the war, Marshall has become one of the most respected military leaders in the world, not because of battles he personally fights, but because of the army he helps create. His greatest victories happen far from the front lines. But while one general builds the army, the next general's decision makes headlines across the world. And what happens next divides historians to this day. Chapter 2. Douglas MacArthur. The Philippines are falling. Japanese forces continue advancing, and American troops are running out of food, ammunition, and hope. Then comes an order that changes everything. General Douglas MacArthur is instructed to leave. But one question refuses to disappear. How does a commander remain one of the most feared generals of the war after being forced to abandon the battlefield? MacArthur reluctantly leaves the Philippines in March 1942 under orders from President Roosevelt. Before departing, he delivers the promise that becomes one of the most famous statements of the war: "I shall return." Many wonder whether he ever will, but that wasn't even the worst part. The Japanese now control much of the Pacific, and Allied morale is dangerously low. Every major operation carries enormous risk. MacArthur responds with an aggressive island-hopping campaign through New Guinea, bypassing heavily defended Japanese positions and striking where the enemy least expects. The strategy saves thousands of Allied lives while steadily pushing Japanese forces backward. In October 1944, he fulfills his promise by returning to the Philippines during the Battle of Leyte. The moment becomes one of the defining images of the Pacific War. To his soldiers, he represents determination. To Japan's commanders, he becomes one of the Allies' most persistent and dangerous opponents. His reputation stretches far beyond the battlefield. But even MacArthur's fame is overshadowed by the final man on this list, a commander whose speed, aggression, and relentless attacks make him one of the most feared generals of the entire Second World War. Chapter 1. George S. Patton. By late 1944, German commanders know exactly what happens whenever one American army appears on the horizon. It doesn't stop. It doesn't wait. And it certainly doesn't fight cautiously. One question quickly spreads through enemy headquarters. How do you stop a general who refuses to slow down? George S. Patton has already built a reputation unlike any other American commander. Loud, demanding, and fiercely aggressive, he believes the fastest way to defeat the enemy is to keep attacking before they have time to recover. His philosophy is simple: speed wins wars. But here's what made him so dangerous. Patton constantly pushes his armored divisions farther and faster than many believe possible. During the breakout from Normandy, his Third Army races across France, liberating towns at an astonishing pace and forcing German forces into a chaotic retreat. His relentless momentum leaves enemy commanders struggling to predict where he'll strike next. Then comes the Battle of the Bulge. As Germany launches its final major offensive in the West, Allied commanders urgently need reinforcements to relieve the surrounded defenders at Bastogne. Patton proposes something few think can be done. He orders the Third Army to pivot nearly 90 degrees in the middle of winter and attack north toward Bastogne. Within days, his forces arrive and help break the German encirclement, one of the most remarkable operational maneuvers of the war. Even senior German officers later acknowledge Patton as one of America's most aggressive battlefield commanders. His willingness to attack relentlessly forces opponents to react instead of execute their own plans. Although his outspoken personality often creates controversy among Allied leaders, his results on the battlefield are difficult to ignore. By the end of World War II, George S. Patton has become one of the most feared American generals ever to command an army. His greatest weapon isn't superior numbers or better equipment. It's the constant pressure he places on every enemy he faces. What all 5 generals shared was not the same leadership style. One inspired soldiers from the front. Another quietly commanded over 1 million men. One built the army that won the war. Another mastered the Pacific. And the last attacked so relentlessly that entire German formations were forced onto the defensive. Different personalities, but each earned the respect of allies and the fear of their enemies. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories about the commanders, soldiers, and battles that shaped military history. Thanks for watching.